everyone. In the previous video, we learned the basics of getting sound out of the modular subtractive synthesizer. And in this video, we're going to learn how to set values and parameters of the modular subtractive synth using the Modular Synth preset structure. I'm also going to show you how to, in semi-real time, adjust the parameters of the modular subtractive synth so that you can shape your sound with a little bit more ease than going back and forth between play mode and the blueprints. So I'm going to give you a little demonstration here real quick of what that looks like. So I'm setting the oscillator 1 octave to -2 and setting the oscillator 1 type to saw, and I'm going to set the oscillator 2 type to saw and set the oscillator 2 octave to say 3. Click in my viewport and oh, that's a little grating on the ears. So I'm going to bring my oscillator 2 octave down to -1. This should give me a good satisfying bass sound. That's fun. What'll it sound like if I drop the oscillator 1 octave to -3, drop the oscillator 2 octave to -2, and set the oscillator 2 type to square? Now we're getting a little bit too low, but that's a good demonstration of what we're going to learn how to do in this video. So let's get started. From the previous video, you should have this blueprint set up, which allows us some very simple functionality for the modular synth. Now I'm just going to do a little bit of cleanup to make this blueprint ready for what we're about to do with presets. The first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this line to the modular synth reference for the note off node, and I'm going to give it its own modular synth reference. And put that down here. Next, I'm going to move this reference to the modular synth down. Because we're going to put another node in between our one key pressed event and our note on node. Now, synths have all kinds of settings and parameters that allow us to shape the sound that is produced. We can feed a preset to our modular synth on the spot by using a set synth preset node. So I'm going to go ahead and create a set synth preset node, but first I'm going to get rid of this execution line to our note on node. Then I'm going to right click, search for set synth preset, and you'll see our set synth preset modular synth node here. And that's created with a reference to our modular synth automatically. The set synth preset node should be called before our note on node. So let's go ahead and pass an execution line from the pressed event to our set synth preset event, and then pass an execution line from our set synth preset node to our note on node. So what's going to happen is I'm going to press the 1 key. The set synth preset function is going to create a synth preset for the target, which is our modular synth. Then it's going to play the note that we specify from our modular synth using the presets that were just created. So let's take a look at the set synth preset. This synth preset input says that it's looking for a modular synth preset structure. A data structure is a variable type containing several mixed variable types. So this input is looking for one setting, which actually defines several settings. I'm going to move this event back a little bit so we have some room. Okay. I'm going to drag off the synth preset input, and I'm going to choose Make Modular Synth Preset. So you can see here that this node will make our synth preset at the time that the set synth preset node is triggered. And once I click this expand button, we're going to get to see all of the settings that go into making a modular synth preset. I won't go into every one of these settings. Synth parameters are for another video. Suffice it to say, this is where you can shape the sound of your synth. So let's see how. First, let's press play and listen to the default sound of our synth. So I know from this setup that I just have to press the 1 key to trigger my synth. So I press play and I get a compiler error. This compiler error says one or more blueprints has an unresolved compiler error. Are you sure you want to play in editor? I play no, and then I see what my compiler errors are by pressing the compile button. And down here in the compiler results, it says the current value of patches pin is invalid. So I'm familiar with this error. When you have a make modular synth preset node, you have to scroll all the way to the bottom of all of these presets. And here there's a little array input called patches. Drag off of that and click make array. Once you do that, that should fix your compiler errors. So I press compile, then I press play. And I press the 1 key. And you could hear my synth play. Great, that's functional. Now let's change a parameter or two here in the Make Modular Synth preset node and demonstrate that we can change some of these values to shape our sound. So first, I'm going to change the oscillator 1 type. The modular synth has 2 oscillators by default. They're both set to saw by default. I'm going to change oscillator 1 to a square, and I'm going to put the oscillator 1 octave at some negative value. When I hover over each of these settings, it tells me what the range is. So for example, the oscillator 1 octave takes a float value from -8 to 8. So I'm going to choose -2. That alone should be enough. Just changing the oscillator and changing the octave of that oscillator should give me a much lower tone and a different timbre, since one of my oscillators is now a square wave. So I'm going to compile, press play, and test this again. All right, awesome. Now you hear how there's a slight stereo delay going on. We can fix that by scrolling down to the effects. You'll see here that there is a stereo delay time and a stereo delay mode and a stereo delay enabled. I'm going to unclick stereo delay enabled, compile, and hit play to make sure that that stereo delay is gone. Okay, awesome, cool. So we can use this already to start trying to get the sound that we want. However, this method of shaping our sound is a bit unwieldy. It's a little bit slow to come into the blueprint, change a value, press play, press 1, trigger our note, and see how it sounds. So let's try and find a way to make this a little bit easier. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a variable. And I'm going to create this variable for, say, oscillator 1 octave. So I'm going to call this variable osc1 underscore octave. Hit enter. And then I'm going to make sure that my variable type is an integer. Having the variable as an integer for the octave will make it simpler for now rather than a float. Then I'm going to make sure that my variable is public by clicking on this little eyeball icon here. Then I'm going to drag my osc1 octave variable into the blueprint and select get osc1 octave. And I'm going to connect that to the osc1 octave input. It's just going to convert it for us. Okay. Then I'm going to compile, and everything looks good. Now, because this is a public variable, I can go to my level, to my synth BP actor, and you'll see here under the default section, there's an osc1 octave variable that I can now change from here. Now, in order to test this, I'm going to change the active play mode to selected viewport. Okay, so now we're in play mode. I'm going to press 1 to play my synth, and then I'm going to hit Shift F1, which frees up my mouse. And over here in the world outliner, I'm going to scroll down, select Synth BP. There's my OSC1 octave. I'm going to change it to -2. Then I'm going to click in the viewport, and now I have control here, and I'm going to hit 1 to play my synth again. And you can hear that oscillator 1 octave has been dropped down 2 octaves. Okay, cool, so that works. I'm gonna get out of play mode, go back into my blueprint, and I'm gonna create a few more parameters to play with. I wanna be able to change the wave shape for oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, and I want to also be able to control the octave for oscillator 2. So I'm going to need a few more variables. In order to change the type of wave that the oscillators are playing, this is looking for an enumerator variable. So I need to create an enumerator variable. First, I'm going to create the variable. I'm going to call it oscillator1_type, make it public. When I'm choosing my oscillator 1 type variable, I want to click on the variable type dropdown and search for eSynth. You're going to see eSynth oscillator 1 type. So I'm going to select this type, drag the type into my blueprint, get oscillator 1 type, and feed that into the oscillator 1 type input. Compile. And let's make sure that shows up correctly in the level. So I click on my synth blueprint. You can see here oscillator 1 type, I can select from a drop down. So let's create a couple more variables for oscillator 2. I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to name it oscillator 2 type. And this is basically still enum eSynth oscillator 1 type. Doesn't matter that it says oscillator 1 type. As you can see, that's our only choice, 1 oscillator type. So there's no 2 oscillator type, so that'll work. Drag this into my blueprint, get oscillator 2 type, connect this to my oscillator 2 type input. Then one more variable. I'm going to call this oscillator 2_octave and make both of these public and make sure that this is an integer. Going to drag this in, get oscillator 2 octave, drag it down here, and connect this to my oscillator 2 octave input. Okay, cool. I'm going to compile, go back to my level, make sure my synth BP is selected, and you'll see down here now I can, in semi-real time, adjust all of these parameters to shape my sound. So let's play around a little bit. I'm going to enter play mode and set some of these parameters. Shift F1 to free up my mouse, scroll down, select synth BP, set oscillator 1 octave to -2, and gonna make the oscillator 1 type a sine. And then the oscillator 2 type, I'm gonna make a triangle and make the oscillator 2 octave -1. And I should have a nice kind of low bassy sound. Okay, not bad, not bad. Let's try some other settings. Shift F1 to free up my mouse. I'm going to set the oscillator 1 octave to 0, set the oscillator 1 type to saw, and set the oscillator 2 type to noise. Let's see how that sounds. All right, so you can see here that if I wanted to, I could create a public variable for every single one of the parameters for the modular synth, and I can adjust them in semi-real time by messing with the parameters here in the public variables. So that does it for part 1 for our modular synth presets. In the next video, we're going to take a look at the modular synth preset bank, which actually allows us to store some of these settings and recall them for later use. Thanks so much for watching.